I opened the door and saw a man standing on the porch, his face covered. He handed me the debt collection note and left without saying a word. The strange thing was, the worst thing that day was not the note, but the other envelope in my pocket. There was nothing special about that morning. It was colder than usual, the ground was hard, and walking on it felt like stepping on rocks. I walked to the post office because Bear's feet were still sore. There were only a few acquaintances on the way, and everyone said a quick goodbye and continued on their way. In Dust Creek, people were quiet, not because they were cold, but because they had nothing new to say. When I got the letter, I knew right away that the pale yellow envelope was not the wrong kind. I put it in my pocket, buttoned it, and went home. I always opened my letters at home. I didn't like opening them in front of other people. In this town, people had a habit of looking at your hands as if your story was theirs. As soon as I entered the yard, I saw my mother leaning against the wall, clutching her chest and coughing. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Okay," she said, but her voice didn't sound like it. I didn't say more. Old people here always said they were okay, even when they couldn't stand up. I went straight to the stable. Bear was still, not eating as usual. I mixed some oats in to make it easier for him to swallow. When he lowered his head, I took out the envelope. The wind blew into the stable, chilling my hands. I opened the letter and read it once, then read it again. They accepted me into the horse training course. I had to be there for 14 days. I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, I just folded the letter. I didn't know whether to be happy or worried. I didn't know what the future would look like if I left. All I knew was, my mother couldn't manage on her own, and the farm was going downhill. Around noon, the man came riding up, the same man who had given the note in the hook. He handed the note and left without saying a word. This kind of silence was normal in Dust Creek. People didn't stop to explain things that everyone already understood. I took the note into the kitchen. Mother looked at it for a few seconds and then put it down on the table. "I knew this was coming," she said. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. I asked, 6 days, what are we going to do? She simply said, "Whatever you can do, do it. If not, then don't." I didn't like that answer, but I understood. Anywhere else, people could manage. In Dust Creek, where the land was poor and money was scarce, doing it was just a euphemism for having no choice. In the afternoon, I went to the well to get water. The water was so cold it burned my hands. I washed the horse troughs, fed the chickens, and tidied up the corner of the coop. I did everything more slowly than usual because my mind kept returning to the 2 pieces of paper, one that forced me to stay, the other that forced me to go. In the evening, I put them on the table, the IOU on the left, the Santa Fe letter on the right. They lay side by side like 2 cuts from which I had to choose. I looked at them for about 10 minutes without touching them. Finally, I put them both in a drawer and locked it. I hung the keys on the nail next to the door, not hidden, just so I wouldn't see them again. That night, I lay listening to the wind blowing through the cracks in the door, listening to the creaking of the wood as if it were worried for me. I turned my face to the wall and tried to sleep. But before I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, everything would be harder than today. And I wasn't sure I was good enough to stand. It was dark by the time I finished dinner. Mother ate a few spoonfuls of porridge and then stopped. She said she wasn't hungry, but I knew she was tired. She sat leaning on the old chair, rubbing her temples as if she were dizzy. I tried to say something, but then stopped. Sometimes talking doesn't solve anything. I took the oil lamp and went out to the stable. The air outside was cold and dry, blowing like a knife. The oil lamp swayed as the wind blew through the glass. In the stable, Bear leaned against one wall, his ears flat. I checked the trough, and there were only a few leftover oats. He ate less than yesterday. "It's me," I said, softly, as usual. Bear raised his head, sniffed my hand, and stood still again. He wasn't young anymore. I knew that, but every time I saw him tired, I felt something inside me tired too. I sat down on the old wooden chair in the corner of the barn. It was airier than inside, though colder. I took the Santa Fe letter out of my pocket. I didn't open it again, just held it in my hand. The paper was a little stiff, the edges were wrinkled. I turned it around a few times, for no particular reason. I just wasn't ready to look at the words inside again. I heard the barn door open slightly. Mom walked in, walking slowly, and using her hands to hold on to her sides, as if afraid of slipping. "Why aren't you asleep yet?" she asked. "Bear eats so little," I replied. Mom looked at him for a long time, and then said, "He's old, honey." I didn't answer, because Bear was the only thing left from Dad's time. Hearing that, I just felt colder. Mom saw the envelope in my hand. She asked bluntly, "They're taking you?" I nodded. She let out a slow breath, neither happy nor sad, just accepting. "So what are you going to do?" "We have 6 days," I said. "If I leave now—" I didn't continue. I didn't want to say what I was thinking. Mom would be left alone, with a farm that was about to be lost and a sick horse. Mom leaned against the barn wall, her breath audible in the cold air. "Mara, you're a big girl. You have to choose." I bent down, holding the oil lamp so I wouldn't have to look her in the eye. "I don't want to leave you." "I don't want you stuck here because of me," she said. "Staying has its difficulties. Going has its own difficulties. Neither is easy." That sounded calm, but I knew it hurt Mom more than it hurt me. I stood up and spread some new hay for Bear. Mom watched silently as I did each little thing, patching the gap in the barn wall, tying the rope, checking Bear's feet. I found myself doing it automatically, as if every day was the same. When Mom left the barn, she said, "If you decide to go, just tell me a day in advance, so I can prepare myself." I just said, yes. I stayed in the barn for another half hour, not doing much, just sitting there, listening to Bear breathe, listening to the wind blowing through the wooden roof. The cold air seeped into my sleeves and made me more awake. So awake that I realized what I didn't want to admit. If I left, Bear might not be here when I came back. If I stayed, that chance would be gone. As for Mom, I didn't dare think about it anymore. When I got back home, Mom was asleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, took off my shoes, and lay down without turning off the light. I felt myself being pulled in 2 directions, not with any great emotion, but with little things. Mom's cough, Bear's weak leg, the 6-day note, the 14-day letter. I turned my face to the wall and tried to sleep, but my head kept repeating one simple sentence. If I don't choose soon, one of 2 things will choose for me, and I fear that more than anything. I woke up a little later the next morning. Mother was sitting at the table, holding a cup of hot tea in both hands as if to keep warm. I asked her if she slept well. She said, enough, but I saw that her eyes were sunken. I didn't press further. In Dust Creek, people are used to putting up with a lot of things, just to avoid bothering others. I fed Bear before going into town. He ate a little more than yesterday, but not half the trough. I stood watching him eat slowly, chewing each bit as if trying to conserve his strength. I patted him on the shoulder and closed the barn door. Out on the street, the morning wind carried dust in long streaks. In front of the blacksmith shop, a few men were smoking, and when they saw me, they nodded. No one asked any questions. I think they knew about the debt paper yesterday, but they didn't want to tell me. In this town, people don't pry into other people's affairs, but they can't hide anything either. As I passed the notice board in the small square, I stopped. I didn't mean to look, but my eyes accidentally fell on it. 7 new nails had been hammered in, and a new list of debts had been hung up. My farm's name was on the 3rd row. Not too big, not too small, just enough for anyone to see. I wasn't embarrassed. I was just tired of not wanting to explain anymore. The owner of the fabric store came out, saw me, and said, "Hang in there, Mara." I nodded. I didn't know what else to say. I stopped by the grocery store to buy some cold medicine for my mother. The store owner looked at me for a moment and then asked bluntly, 6 more days? I said yes. He sighed. That's tough. I didn't react, not because I was strong, but because I'd heard that sentence too many times in my life. On the way home, I saw a freight collector's cart passing by. The driver looked at me for a few seconds, as if to ask if I needed to sell some of my stuff. I turned away. I didn't want to think about it right now. When I got home, my mother was hanging blankets in the yard. I told her to do it, but she said she wanted to do some work herself, to save her energy. I didn't quite understand what she meant. Save her energy for what? But I didn't ask. At her age, it's sometimes easier to keep quiet than to tell the truth. In the afternoon, I checked the barn again. There were some places where the wooden walls were peeling off, so I hammered them back together. When I was done, my hands were covered in wood dust. I washed them in the well, the cold water stinging my skin. I looked at my reflection in the basin. Nothing different, but it didn't look like me from a few years ago. I looked older, more tired. In the evening, my mother and I ate thin soup. My mother asked, "What happened in town today?" "Nothing much," I said. I didn't want to mention the debt sheet. Mom must have guessed, but she didn't ask. I took out the clothes to wash. As I wrung them out, I thought about the Santa Fe letter.